The family who lived off-grid in a tropical forest for 60 years, a real infidelity story. Have you ever stumbled upon a secret so deeply buried that it changes everything you thought you knew about your family? For me, it started with a single letter, faded ink on yellowing paper, tucked inside a cracked wooden chest deep in the heart of a tropical forest. I hadn't planned on uncovering anything. I was simply there to fulfill my grandfather's final wish. Find the house where it all began. I had grown up hearing vague stories about my grandparents leaving the modern world behind, vanishing into the wilderness of a remote island in the Pacific. People whispered about them like they were legends, a couple who abandoned society to live off the grid for 60 years. Some said they were rebels. Others claimed they were hiding from something. No one really knew the truth. As the boat cut through the turquoise water toward the dense green coastline, a knot tightened in my stomach. I wasn't just searching for a house. I was walking into the past, into secrets no one had dared to speak aloud. My name is Elena. I'm 29, a journalist by profession, but this journey isn't about a story for the world. It's about my family. It's about understanding why my grandfather, Daniel, and grandmother, Celia, disappeared without a trace in 1964, leaving behind 2 young children, including my father. When I arrived at the edge of the forest, the air changed. It was thick, warm, and humming with life. Birds cawed overhead, leaves rustled like whispers, and somewhere in the distance, water trickled down unseen rocks. A man stood waiting for me at the trail's entrance. His name was Matteo, the last villager who claimed to have seen my grandparents alive. They built their world where no one could find them, he said, his voice low, as if the forest itself was listening. But every paradise hides its own storm. His words lingered as we walked deeper into the jungle. Towering palms and twisting vines formed a green cathedral overhead, filtering sunlight into golden beams that danced across the path. Each step carried the weight of history. By the time we reached the clearing, my breath caught in my throat. There was a house, if you could still call it that. Wooden walls had been overtaken by roots and moss, but its structure stood defiantly, like a memory refusing to fade. And then I saw it. The chest, half buried near the veranda. Something inside me whispered that this was where the real story began, not with their disappearance, but with what they were trying to keep hidden. I knelt down, fingers brushing away the damp earth, and for the first time I felt it. Not curiosity, but a pulse of dread. Whatever waited inside that chest had survived 6 decades of silence. And now it had found me. The chest was heavier than it looked. Matteo helped me drag it onto the veranda, its wooden lid creaking like an old throat struggling to speak. The brass latch had rusted shut, but with a firm twist of my pocketknife, it snapped loose. As the lid opened, the smell of damp paper and cedar rose into the air, a scent that felt strangely intimate, like stepping into someone's unguarded thoughts. Inside were letters, journals, and photographs. Decades of life sealed away. At the very top lay a leather-bound diary. Its first page, dated June 3, 1964, was signed in looping script. Celia Moreno. Celia was my grandmother, but to me, she'd always been a mystery. A black-and-white photograph tucked inside family albums, her expression calm and distant, as if she was already somewhere far away. According to family lore, she had been a nurse in Manila, intelligent and fiercely independent. Daniel, my grandfather, was a botanist from Spain who came to the Philippines on a research grant. They met by chance at a hospital during a typhoon. He was struck by her resilience. She was intrigued by his quiet intensity. But what made them abandon everything? I flipped through the diary carefully, my fingers grazing over her words. Her voice emerged in neat handwriting, measured, thoughtful, tinged with urgency. She wrote of falling in love with Daniel, of nights spent discussing dreams of freedom under lantern light, of their shared longing to escape the noise of the modern world. And then, midway through an entry, a line caught my attention. Daniel believes isolation will protect us. But I wonder, what if we're not just running toward something but away from someone? Question hung heavy. Matteo leaned against a beam, watching me. They were admired, he said slowly. But people noticed their sudden departure. Celia stopped visiting the village market. Daniel avoided the old harbor. One day they simply vanished. I closed the diary, sensing that beneath their romantic idealism was a fracture, a hairline crack that would eventually splinter everything. As the sun began to dip behind the canopy, casting long shadows across the clearing, Matteo handed me a small photograph he'd found wedged between two floorboards. It showed Celia standing beside an unfamiliar man. She wasn't smiling, but there was something in her eyes, a softness that didn't appear in any of her pictures with Daniel. On the back, a single word was scrawled: before. I stared at it, feeling my heartbeat quicken. Who was this man? And why was his presence hidden beneath decades of dust and silence? The forest, once vibrant and welcoming, now felt charged, like a stage where the first act had ended, and something deeper, more dangerous, was about to begin. That night the forest didn't sleep. Crickets chirped in restless rhythm, and the wind hissed through the leaves like an unspoken warning. I sat inside the old house with a lantern flickering on the wooden table, Celia's diary open in front of me. Each page seemed to peel away another layer of her carefully constructed life. Midway through the diary, her entries shifted in tone. The earlier pages brimmed with passion and defiance, two young lovers building their own Eden. But later, her handwriting grew tense, words pressed deeper into the paper as if they carried a weight she couldn't speak aloud. Daniel grows more watchful, she wrote. He checks the trail at dawn, questions every sound at night. I pretend not to notice, but his silence is louder than his words. I could almost hear her voice, trembling between loyalty and unease. Daniel, the man I'd only known through family stories as a brilliant but eccentric botanist, began to take shape as something more complicated. Devoted, yes, but consumed by a fear he couldn't name. I found another photograph tucked between the diary's pages. It was the same mysterious man from before, this time standing on the deck of a boat, sunlight glinting off the water behind him. And beneath it, an unfinished note in Celia's handwriting. If he finds us, everything will change. A chill crept down my spine. Who was he? The man in the photo? A lover? A threat? Or both? Matteo returned the next morning with a woven basket of fruit and, sensing my unease, sat beside me. There were rumors, he said quietly. Before they left, a stranger came to the village many times. He wasn't local. People said Celia spoke to him in secret near the harbor. His words clicked against the fragments I'd read like puzzle pieces snapping into place. This wasn't just a love story turned off-grid. It was a flight from something real, perhaps dangerous. Later that afternoon, I ventured deeper into the property. At the edge of the forest, half hidden under tangled vines, I discovered a small shed. Inside, under a tarp, lay rusted fuel canisters, a broken compass, and a wooden crate filled with letters wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from moisture. The letters weren't written by Daniel or Celia. They were from the man in the photo, signed simply R. His words were intimate, poetic, and painfully sincere. He spoke of promises, of nights that felt infinite, of a love that shouldn't have existed but did anyway. By the time I finished reading, the air in the shed felt suffocating. This wasn't just a family mystery. This was a love triangle buried under 60 years of silence. And for the first time, I wondered if the paradise my grandparents built wasn't born out of love, but betrayal. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was coming. The storm arrived at dusk, sudden and fierce. Rain hammered the roof in relentless sheets, wind howled through the cracks, and the old house groaned like it remembered every storm it had endured. I sat by the lantern's dim light, Celia's diary open to its final section, entries dated months before their disappearance from the outside world. Her words were sharper now, stripped of romanticism. She wrote of choices that cannot coexist, of a secret that threatened to shatter everything she and Daniel had built. The name R appeared more frequently, his presence growing like a shadow beneath each line. One entry stopped me cold. Daniel found the letters. He didn't speak for 3 days. When he finally did, it wasn't with words but with a plan to disappear. He believes starting over in isolation will keep us safe. But what he doesn't understand is that it isn't danger chasing us. It's love. And guilt. I traced the ink with my fingertip, feeling the tremor in her confession. This wasn't a passing affair. It was a love that had once been real, perhaps still was, lingering like the humid air pressing against my skin. The next entry was even more haunting. R came to the harbor last night. I saw him from the cliffs. He waited until dawn. I couldn't face him. I told Daniel we needed to leave sooner. He agreed without asking why. Matteo, who had returned to secure the windows against the storm, noticed the change in my expression. "You found something," he said. I handed him the diary. He read in silence, his brow furrowing with each line. "This man R," he said finally. "He came back years later. People said he wandered the coast looking for someone who'd already vanished. He died not far from here, alone." The rain softened, but inside me the storm only grew. I went back to the shed and retrieved the last letter from the crate. It was unopened, the paper brittle but intact. With trembling hands I broke the seal. "Celia, if you choose him, I'll understand. But don't disappear without a word. Don't let our story end in silence. If you ever want to return, I'll be waiting at the harbor. Always R." The date on the letter was a week after my grandparents vanished. She had never written back. In that moment, the legend unraveled. My grandparents hadn't fled society out of idealism or fear of the modern world. They had run from a love that had become impossible to reconcile. Daniel's silence, Celia's guilt, R's unending hope. I sat there, letter in hand, as lightning illuminated the forest outside. The past wasn't abstract anymore. It was alive, raw, and pulsing through every corner of this house. And for the first time, I realized this story didn't end with their disappearance. It began there. The storm passed by morning, leaving the forest washed clean, every leaf glistening with dew. Mist hung low over the clearing, curling around the house like a memory reluctant to fade. I stood on the veranda clutching the letter from R, its edges soft from my hands, and watched sunlight break through the trees. For the first time since arriving, I felt their presence, not as legends but as flawed, breathing people. Daniel, building a sanctuary to protect a love he feared losing. Celia, torn between 2 lives that could never coexist. And R, waiting at the harbor, never receiving the closure he deserved. I returned to the chest and carefully placed the diary and letters back inside, exactly as I'd found them. It struck me that for decades, my family had preserved only half the truth. We celebrated their courage to live off-grid, their defiance of modernity, but never questioned what drove them there. Now I understood. Paradise had been their refuge, but also their penance. Matteo joined me outside, leaning against a wooden post, eyes scanning the trees as if listening to the forest breathe. "So," he asked gently, "what will you do with what you've found?" I hesitated. As a journalist, my instinct was to tell stories. But this one wasn't mine to expose. It belonged to them. "I'll keep it," I finally said. "Not to hide it, but to carry it honestly." He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Some stories are meant to be told slowly," he said. Before leaving, I walked to the cliff overlooking the harbor. From here, I could almost imagine our standing below all those years ago, eyes searching the horizon for a woman who had already chosen silence. The tide lapped gently against the rocks, as if echoing his patience. I took a deep breath, letting the salty air fill my lungs. The truth hadn't shattered anything. It had clarified everything. My grandparents weren't mythical figures. They were human, beautifully and painfully human. Their choices had shaped generations, even in silence. As I boarded the boat home, the forest receded into the distance, but the story stayed with me, settling not as a burden but as an inheritance. Some legacies are not written in bloodlines, but in secrets whispered through time. I glanced at the chest now safely tucked beside me. Its weight no longer frightened me. It was the weight of understanding. And as the island disappeared on the horizon, I couldn't help but wonder, how many other stories remain buried, waiting for someone someday to listen? Would you like please share video? And don't forget to subscribe to our channel.